8 a.m. A construction worker on the 21st floor looks up. A steel column, thick as a person, rated to hold thousands of tons, is bending sideways. Not cracking. Bending. Like it's made of something softer than steel has any right to be. He doesn't stay to find out what happens next. Nobody does. Within the hour, a 37-story tower in the middle of Manhattan is empty. Then the block around it. Then the block after that. By nightfall, 7 other buildings are evacuated. A 5-block frozen zone is locked down. And the city's fire commissioner is standing in front of cameras, saying the building has been determined to be unstable. This tower used to be Pfizer's global headquarters. By July 7, 2026, it was something else. A live test of exactly how much weight a piece of steel can silently absorb before it gives up. Subscribe, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly what almost brought it down, and why the people responsible can't agree on what happened. 235 East 42nd Street wasn't built to fail. It wasn't even built to be housing. Raised in 1960, designed in clean international style lines, it spent decades as office space, for years, the corporate nerve center for Pfizer, until the company moved to the Spiral in Hudson Yards in 2018. Then the tower sat there. And New York, sitting on a housing crisis it can't build its way out of fast enough, looked at an empty office block and saw something else. Roughly 1,600 luxury rental apartments, part of what its developer calls New York City's largest office-to-residential conversion to date. It's called office-to-residential conversion, and on paper, it's the win-win the city's been chasing. Old towers, new homes, problem solved. But a building doesn't care what's on paper. It only cares about the math. To understand why this project mattered before it ever cracked a column, you have to understand the bet New York made. After 2020, the city was left holding tens of millions of square feet of empty office space. Remote work didn't just dent Manhattan's commercial real estate, it gutted entire blocks of it. Landlords sat on towers nobody wanted to lease. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, rents were climbing past what most working New Yorkers could reasonably afford. City Hall's answer was office-to-residential conversion, at a scale nobody had really attempted before. Tax incentives were built specifically to make it happen. Hundreds of millions of dollars in exemptions offered to developers willing to gut old office towers and turn them into housing, some of it earmarked as affordable units. 235 East 42nd wasn't just a conversion project. It was positioned as the conversion project, the flagship, the proof that this policy could work at scale. Developer Metro Loft didn't quietly convert an old office building. They assembled financing north of $1 billion, secured city tax breaks tied to affordable housing requirements, and set out to build what they called the largest office-to-residential conversion in American history. Which means when 2 columns bent on the 21st floor, it wasn't just one developer's bad Tuesday. It was a stress test, literal and political, on the entire strategy New York is counting on to solve its housing crisis. If the city's flagship conversion project can buckle mid-construction, every other tower being eyed for the same treatment suddenly looks a little less certain. That's the pressure sitting underneath every statement made in the days that followed, because admitting a systemic problem doesn't just threaten one building. It threatens the model. Every building on Earth is designed around one number engineers rarely discuss publicly, because it's not meant to be tested: load capacity. The maximum weight a column, a beam, a floor can carry before it stops holding and starts failing. Office floors are light, open space, desks, foot traffic. Residential floors are heavier, and this conversion added something specific. The upper 15 floors, beginning on the 22nd floor, were being expanded outward, making them wider than the floors below. More width, more weight, pressed down onto columns that were engineered for a lighter building doing a lighter job. Convert one building into another, and you're not just renovating. You're quietly rewriting the number it was built around, and hoping the structure never finds out. At 235 East 42nd, the structure found out. Just before 8 a.m., Tuesday, July 7th, FDNY gets a call, bricks, falling from the facade. What they find is worse. 2 structural columns on the 21st floor are buckling in real time. A buckled steel beam is visible from the street through a window. The building was sagging between the 21st and 26th floors. Fire Chief John Esposito doesn't soften it. The building has continued to move since we have been on scene. It does mean it is not yet stable. Within hours, the tower and 7 surrounding buildings are empty, including a nearby Hampton Inn. The city's fire commissioner puts the response at over 150 fire and EMS personnel on scene. Mayor Zoran Mamdani calls it an extremely serious situation and locks down a frozen zone spanning 5 blocks. Not construction noise. A building in the middle of Manhattan that might be starting to come down. To understand what those workers actually saw on the 21st floor, you need to understand how steel fails, because it doesn't fail the way people assume. Steel is strong under tension. Pull it and it resists enormously. But under compression, under a load pressing straight down, a slender steel column doesn't just crush. It buckles. Push down hard enough on something long and comparatively thin, and instead of crumbling, it bows sideways like a drinking straw bent between 2 fingers. Engineers call this failure mode exactly that, buckling. It's one of the oldest, most well-understood failure mechanisms in structural engineering, and one of the most dangerous because a column that's buckling is often still carrying enormous weight right up until the moment it isn't. That's why witnesses described the columns at 235 East 42nd as bending into the shape of a sideways V, rather than shattering or crumbling outright. That shape is the signature of a compression failure, a column being asked to carry more than its slenderness could handle, folding instead of holding. And it explains why the danger wasn't over the moment the bending was spotted. A buckling column doesn't have a single point of failure, it has a process. It can keep deforming, slowly transferring its load onto neighboring columns, which were never designed to pick up the slack. That's the exact chain reaction that turns a 2-column problem into a 5-floor problem, and a 5-floor problem into a total collapse. It's also why Fire Chief Esposito's team didn't just look at the 2 bent columns. They assessed the building floor by floor, because in a steel-framed high-rise, a compromised column doesn't fail alone forever. It fails, and then it starts asking the columns around it to fail too. Here's what almost nobody outside structural engineering understands. Not every collapse is the Hollywood version. A tower folding into the street. That's total collapse, and it's rare. Chief Esposito himself said a full collapse onto the street was less likely than the alternative. What officials were actually racing to prevent was a partial collapse, which could be internal, a handful of floors around the failing columns pancaking down onto the floors below. Still catastrophic. Still potentially fatal. But a very different structural event. And the reason crews moved as fast as they did. Because partial can become total if nothing intervenes in time. By afternoon, a 6-person team reached the 21st floor. By evening, crews were installing temporary shoring, jacks and new steel, stealing the load off the failing columns before they gave out completely. The city's buildings commissioner said the words every engineer on site was hoping to be able to say, "We were able to get to the 21st floor to inspect the work that's being done and feel confident that the emergency work is stabilizing the situation." Overnight work held. By Wednesday, officials confirmed the building had not moved for several hours. Not fixed, not resolved, just no longer moving. Most residents returned within a day, for buildings stayed under vacate orders. The investigation was only beginning. Here's where the official version starts to split in two, and it splits along a fault line that matters. The project's developer, Nathan Berman, didn't just wave the incident off. He offered a specific mechanical theory. This additional load that we put on those floors caused those 2 particular columns to collapse. He even posed the question himself, on the record, why those particular 2 columns and nothing else? The implication being it was a contained, explainable engineering event, not a systemic one. But Cliff Johnson, a union representative for Steamfitters Local 638, workers installing fire protection inside the building, gave a very different answer to that exact question. They obviously didn't add the right amount of steel. So, the north side of that building is crumbling. The I-beams are bending like cigarettes in there, which is super dangerous. A localized miscalculation, isolated to 2 columns. Or, a building that wasn't given enough steel to carry what was put on top of it, and 2 columns were just the first to show it. And this wasn't the first sign something was wrong. Before Tuesday, the site had logged 24 other complaints since the previous year. Falling material, a worker injury, debris dropping through 5 floors. None of it escalated to a formal violation. There's also an active lawsuit. A construction worker who suffered a grave injury after what he was standing on gave way in September 2025, naming the developer and site owner as defendants, filed months before the columns buckled. None of that proves which explanation is right. The Department of Buildings said its own investigation was still ongoing at time of writing. But the man who owns the project and the man whose union installs safety systems inside it looked at the same 2 bent columns and came away with opposite explanations. 235 East 42nd isn't an isolated cautionary tale. It's a preview. New York currently has dozens of office-to-residential conversions either underway or approved. A wave of projects all making the same fundamental bet. That decades-old commercial towers, built for a completely different purpose, can safely carry the weight of the homes being stacked inside them. Some of those projects are smaller, simpler jobs. Some are attempting exactly what 235 East 42nd attempted, adding weight, adding width, adding entire floors worth of new load onto frames engineers calculated for a different era, a different use, a different number. Nationally, the pattern repeats. Cities from Chicago to San Francisco to Washington, D.C. are chasing the same conversion strategy for the same reason. Too much empty office space, not enough housing. Nobody wants to say it out loud, but 235 East 42nd is a live case study every other developer running a similar project is quietly watching right now. Because the uncomfortable truth this building exposed isn't really about one bad calculation on 2 columns. It's about how much we're now asking 60-year-old steel frames to silently absorb, all in the name of solving a housing crisis, and how little margin some of them may actually have left. The building didn't fall. Nobody was hurt. In a city of 8 million people, that's closer to luck than guarantee. For a few hours in July 2026, one of Manhattan's most recognizable towers stopped being an apartment project and became something else. A live answer to a question every engineer quietly asks about every old building being pushed into a new life. How much can it actually take? If this is the kind of story you want more of, the moment a structure stops holding and the world finds out why, hit subscribe. Because every building standing over your head right now is carrying a number 2. And sooner or later, one of them is going to test it. This is an ongoing investigation. The account above reflects reporting as of July 2026 and may be updated as findings are released. This is Deadweight.